Literally wants to count to 10. I can do. 10,
3,
9,
4.
8. It's like a sort of Houston liftoff, isn't it?
NASA.
We have ignition.
Boom.
All right, then. Well, thanks everyone for coming to this, again, a virtual forum meeting. Not sure whether this is going to be the last virtual one. I mean, we sort of thought we might try and revert back to in-person meetings this term, but obviously we'll just have to see how the progress of COVID goes to whether we do or we don't. I do appreciate for many of you it is more convenient this way because you haven't got the the journey into the centre of Telford, find a parking space, walk over, etc. So I can imagine for some of you it's probably quite an attractive long-term solution. But say we'll just have to see how things go. All right. Just to sort of in terms of how we sort of do this, you've had the paper sent out, and you might expect in this meeting for us to do a sort of shared screen basis for the forum. Now we may sort of change this in future ones, but at the moment we're not, because the sort of protocol is we're meant to be able to see people's faces. That's part of the DFE guidance. So if we sort of share a screen, it sort of blocks people out, apart from possibly sort of seeing you in sort of mini version at the bottom of the screen. So if you have got the papers around, it might be helpful if you sort of open them as the meeting's going on, so you've got them in front of you. I will sort of take you sort of through them anyway, or Liz will when it comes to the early years one, but obviously it's probably helpful if you've got it in front of you as well. All right, so I will just get the agenda up. And any apologies, Andy?
Yeah, got apologies from Shirley Reynolds, Helen Osterfield, Tracy Smart, and Robert Fox.
Okay, thank you. Right, item 2 then. Now, those who've been on the forum a while, you may recall this goes a certain direction, which is every year we say, right, appointment of chairperson for the academic year. Would anyone like to volunteer? And you can hear the crickets for a moment, and then faces slowly turn in Sue's direction, saying, Sue, how would you like to carry on? And Sue, with not fantastic enthusiasm, but very good grace, says, yes, that's okay if no one else wants to do it. And so it goes. But unfortunately, this is not the way it can go this time, because Sue is only going to be with us for, I think it's just this term, isn't it, Sue?
Yeah.
And then you're retiring. So we do need to have another chairperson, because I don't really want a situation where Sue chairs it for a couple of meetings, then we sort of change midstream. It's much better if it's the same person for the whole academic year. So I realise this could be the longest silence in the world, but I'm about to ask for volunteers to chair the school's forum for the academic year 2020-2021. Oh, is that volunteering, Jill?
Well,
you made a noise there.
I have chaired it a couple of times. I mean,
I nominate Jill.
I will do, but if anybody else wants to do it, please, I don't have to do it by any stretch of the imagination. And it depends how people feel about me doing it, as being a mat, as long as everybody's comfortable with that. I don't know what the rules are, Tim. I don't think there are any now, are there?
No, it doesn't. I'm not even sure it has to be a schools person. I don't know what it says, Andy, but certainly there's no distinction between, academies, mats, maintained schools. There's nothing there at all.
Have full support, Jill.
I knew you'd say that, Michael.
Yeah.
So I'm taking it there are no one else wants to put themselves forward, because I would like to see an exciting election ideally, but you're not going to give me that pleasure, are you? No. Okay, so is that a forum decision then? Jill to be chairperson for the forthcoming academic year? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well done, Jill.
Okay, thank you very much, Jill. This is very much appreciated, because as you know, there can be times when no one wants to do these things, and it does get difficult. You have to have sort of interim chairs for a meeting and all that sort of thing. So very much appreciated, because I know you've got quite a lot on anyway. So to add this to it, thanks very much.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do it for the year, and then
you'll be there for the next 10. That's right.
Yeah, no.
Sure, Sue said that. How many years ago was that, Sue? 5, 6, 7?
Time flies.
When you're having fun, exactly.
Yeah. We're still going to then do the next item.
Yeah, okay. You happy for me to take over, Tim? And
yeah, carry on.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you everybody for your undying support on this matter, and let's try and hurtle through these meetings as quickly as we can. Okay, if we look at the minutes for the 8th of July, which seems like a lifetime away. I'm charged with finding somebody from the college, which I have, Andy, but they weren't able to meet this meeting, but I'll send you the contact details. Okay.
Thanks, Jill. That's much appreciated, because we've struggled to find post 16 representative for quite a while.
So I think that one's sorted.
Great.
Then we had an overview, changing DSG allocations, COVID. So unless you've got anything, Tim.
I don't think so. It was quite a short meeting, as you can see from the minutes. I don't think there was anything that was particularly contentious. We'll talk a little bit more about next year's DSG in one of the items later on.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think there's anything else that is particularly needs to be discussed on that one, unless anyone else got anything they'd like to raise.
Yeah. Anybody else got anything? We're happy to accept those as a true record. Yep.
Yeah, more than happy.
Okay, great. Okay, that's done then. Moving on back to the agenda. Oh, my favourite subject.
Yes.
Update on single status.
I'm going to have to disappoint the form on that one, unfortunately, because we had invited Anna Plummer, that's AP, on the agenda, along to talk about single status. But she wasn't in a position to be able to do that for this meeting. But she has promised to come along to the November meeting. So unfortunately, that means we aren't able to update you this meeting. But at least we'll get in before Sue goes for the next meeting, hopefully, to have an update on single status. It's somehow appropriate, Sue, that you end, your final meeting at the forum with a single status item. I mean, for what it's worth, I don't know whether Simon's heard anything more, but I can't say internally I've sort of picked up much, if anything, really, in the last quite a little while about single status. So my impression is it is still rumbling on. But beyond that, I haven't really got an awful lot to tell you about. Just to remind the forum, the background of this is schools have put aside a chunk of money for single status for obviously a long time now. And there is a view that it's gone on so long now that is a lot of money to be put aside and not used for the children. And so forum wanted to know where single status was, if there is a timeline which is fairly robust for it to be implemented. So we'll have to await a November update on that one, I'm afraid.
Because I think the issue is always, isn't it, around the money that's being held in the single status pot. And we've had various discussions about that over the years. So maybe this might be the year we make some decisions on that one.
Yeah, it was floated, I think, a year or two ago that maybe, because I think at the time we got issues with DSG and a sort of, a deficit building up, that might be the time to release some of the funds. I mean, obviously, I'm sure Anna will say when she comes along for the November meeting that, there's still the risk of more costs for schools. But, at the end of the day, forum can take a view and the individual schools can take a view.
Okay, great. Did you want to say something, Sue?
Only the fact that, at a time of crisis, and we're going through an awful lot of turbulence at the moment with COVID, and schools are looking to increase their IT capacity, that some of that money could be well spent to support schools at a time of great need. And there's over 600,000, I think, in a pot that was a shared pot. So I think my concern was, when people are overwhelmed at the moment, and then this would be a really useful way of spending some money wisely. So that was.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, and and I think the other issue, isn't it, Tim, that there are so many more academies now in Telford, and academies don't, because, single status doesn't apply to us because of. We have our own pay structures, so
it doesn't technically apply to trust schools or VA schools either. So if you add up all those schools in Telford, it's a big chunk of the local market. Whereas at the time, I remember part of the argument everyone putting money aside was that because almost everyone else, or by far the biggest majority of schools, would have to implement single status, that would mean the local market would therefore move in the direction of single status for everyone, because that would be the way it would work. You could argue that now the balance has changed significantly, and that maybe wouldn't quite apply in the same way.
Okay, Heather.
Just to say, my worry is because the 3 maintained special schools it will apply to is the implications for that for the SEND budget as a whole.
Yeah, it's a big issue for you guys.
And we remain really, really worried about that, because obviously we have staffing that we need, and if it's going to cost more or we're going to use that and we don't meet those costs, then that in effect has an implication for everybody, doesn't it? Not just
and of course special schools employ more support staff than anyone else. And because this only applies to support staff, not teachers, it is a disproportionately large impact on special schools, assuming it costs more money. So yes, that is correct, yeah. And particularly the bridge, because I think you have more support staff probably than anyone else in Telford. So
yeah, we do, but it does apply also to Horton and Southall, and any financial implications then affect us all, don't they, across the board? That puts pressure on SEND budget for meeting costs. So because we haven't got staff that we don't need are built into the
right.
needs. So yeah, just want to highlight that.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Thanks, Heather. Any other comments, Simon?
Just going to say, that conversation was really, really helpful, so I get an understanding of the issues. But in terms of what's happening in local authority, it seems to be moving at a snail's pace, and we absolutely need a bit of clarity about what is happening there. I thought that point about using resource for laptops is a very pertinent one, because we can see that where schools are having to quickly close bubbles, access to IT is a limiting or a barrier, definitely, to getting that remote learning in place. So, okay, Tim, we need to take that back and find out what's going on.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I have to tell you, we've been discussing it, Simon, since I opened HLC in 2006.
Oh,
so, yeah, so, it's been... And Shropshire did it when I was the head in Shropshire about, 100 years ago. So we seem to really drag this one out.
I'm sure. And I came from Birmingham, and Birmingham were kind of one of the first ones that did it for lots of legal reasons. But I was amazed at Telford. We still haven't quite nailed that one. So, okay, let's go back and ask the question.
Okay. Christabel, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, for that pot for my school, I've got some classrooms which are incredibly desperate for a toilet facility, because I've got one toilet between 120 boys at the moment, and because of how I'm having to keep bubbles separate, I am desperate for some money somewhere, and I don't know whether I can choose to spend my single status, because I'm close to thinking about it, because one toilet for 120 boys. And we've had one accident and it's not working well. No. So I think a lot of schools need that money.
I think a lot of schools who kept money in their budgets, Christabel, for single status have spent it a long time ago. The secondary schools certainly did, because we needed to use it for, priorities.
Yeah, I think that's true. Most secondaries did. Most primaries still have held on to it. I think that's the stuff.
Right. That's the fact.
I think there might be more primaries going the way I'm going, because I'm looking at getting a quote for the toilet, and that's where it's heading, I think.
Okay. Tim, we need to get some clarity there, don't we? Quite quickly.
We'll try, Simon. Yeah, we'll try.
We'll try. Well, we really do need to. Yeah. Okay.
Let's mix the voice of bitter experience.
Tim will feel your pain on this one.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. Can we just say it's always lovely to talk about single status on a schools forum agenda?
It always comes up 2 or 3 times a year as well, it seems, because it never gets resolved. It just keeps coming back.
Yeah. Okay, let's park that one then. Tim, funding 21-22. There's a paper there.
Yep, there's a paper. Yep. I'll go through it anyway. Obviously it helps if you've got it in front of you, but I will go through it and everything that's significant in it. So. We're in the first year now of the 3-year settlement that was announced when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. And so 21-22, next year's budget will be the second year of this period. They did say that there was going to be year-on-year increases over that 3-year period, and the 21-22 information release does confirm that. So there's a further £2 billion nationally in the schools funding formula. That's not quite as sort of generous as it sounds, because they've sort of mainstreamed the teachers' pay grant and teachers' pension employer contribution grants into the main DSG. So the separate grants for those will cease, and it'll just get all put into DSG.
Okay.
So they've applied that money into the formula factors. They've done it in a particular way. So they put it in the basic per pupil factor, the minimum per pupil funding level, into schools' baselines. So what they haven't done is they haven't put any of that money into lump sum deprivation or low prior attainment factors. So they haven't said why that is, but you could speculate they would see that for low power attainment deprivation funding, much of that funding possibly, maybe, arguably, goes to support staff and therefore aren't affected by the teachers' pay grants. As the DfE hasn't said that, that's me speculating as to in terms of what they've said. So, as a result of the additional funding, key factors in their funding formula increased by 3%. And when we talk about the DfE's funding formula now, we're sort of talking about your funding formula as well, because you might recall a year or two ago, we had a few years of trying to converge to the national funding formula. And then once we had enough money, i.e. our funding had been brought up to the NFF level, we then, in agreement with the forum, moved on our funding formula to mirror the national one. Yeah. I think this year we put a smidge more money into one or two of the factors because various timing differences, etc., may mean we had a smidge more, but pretty much we mirror it. So, got general increase of 3% of the main funding factors. Also increases in the minimum per pupil funding levels. So just to sort of remind of this one, this is a relatively new add-on or addition to the funding formula nationally. And this puts a floor for all England schools in terms of how much each school gets per pupil when you add up all the various different formula factors. So it's going up quite significantly. So from £3,750 to £4,000 for primary schools in 21-22, and from £5,000 to £5,150 for secondary schools. Now, if I was a secondary school, that might strike me as being slightly odd in that you're putting £250 on a smaller sort of sum and £150 on a larger sum. In proportion, it's quite a significantly larger increase for primary schools. And again, it's one of those things, you read the DfE papers, there's no explicit rationale behind this. So again, you'll have to speculate. But you might recall last year that they sort of, again, this might be slightly cynical, but they wanted nice round figures for headlines. So they wanted to say it was going to go to £4,000 for primary schools, albeit over the course of 2 years, and to £5,000 for secondary schools. So the £5,000 they have delivered already this year, 2021, and they're going to go up to £4,000 for primary schools next year. And then you imagine having sort of committed themselves to that, they then had to find some more money for secondary schools, and then it became a matter of what they could afford. Speculation, but they haven't explained, why they've done it otherwise. So I feel entitled to speculate. So they also, they've also increased those base levels by up above. I said they'd moved the teachers' pay grants into the funding formula, and some of that money has gone into the minimum funding levels. So they've taken sort of the headline figures there, and they've added on £180 for primary schools, £265 for secondary schools. And the difference between the phases, because this one is the other way around, secondary is getting more than primary, is in quotes, on the basis of the grant rate schools currently receive. So I think that's what it's basically saying is secondary schools tend to spend a greater portion of their budget on teaching staff, and therefore anything to do with costs of teachers tends to have a greater proportionate impact on secondary schools, and therefore will get more money in. So I think they have explained, I understand the rationale behind that one.
Just to interrupt, Tim, I just think that's also because in secondaries you have a higher percentage of staff on upper pay ranges as well.
Yeah, it's a fair point, Jill, because they would have been looking at the actual cost of teachers, not at the actual numbers of teachers. So yes, you're quite right. You tend to find more teachers with TLRs and a bigger management team, et cetera, in secondary schools. As the 21-22 formula takes effect for academies in September 2021, and it's April 2021 for maintained schools, the separate grants for academies will continue for a further 5 months. So they'll continue until August 2021.
Yeah.
The amount of additional funding for small rural schools will increase in 2021-22. And they say that is a first step towards expanding the support the national funding formula provides for such schools from 2022-23. They don't go on to say how they're going to go about doing that. So I'll have to see. At the moment, the the sort of system is that a school below 150 pupils and the average sort of distance to the next available school is beyond, is it 3 miles for primaries? I forget, Andy, you'd probably...
2 miles for primary, 5 miles for secondary.
Yeah. So if you sort of, the next school down the road is further than that, then you qualify as a rural school. And if you're a rural school of less than 150 pupils, then you get additional funding. And it's basically the smaller you are, the more money you get. So you sort of get money for each child below 150. That's sort of the way it works. In Telford, you know, given the nature of us, we haven't got many who meet the criteria. I think, is it 2, 3?
We've got 3, and they get tiny amounts because they're just below the 150 threshold.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So if you're in Shropshire, this would be quite an issue.
Yeah.
They'll be seriously interested in this because there's a bit of a promise there that in 2022-23, relatively rural authorities like Shropshire could be getting, you know, a fair chunk more. For us, it'll be very, very small beer. You know, you might be talking a few grand here and there. And a bit like, well, this hasn't been running quite as long as single status, but it has been running quite a long time. The government's been talking about a national funding formula for years and years, but they have been moving towards it relatively slowly. And they've said they will shortly put forward proposals to move to a hard NFF in future. Obviously, in government terms, shortly can mean anything between a couple of months to several years, I imagine. But it does express some confidence, I think, that they think they're in a position to get there. And I think they probably are, because most authorities have done like us and they've seen what's coming along the line. And so they've been converging the local formula to the national formula, which I'm sure is what the DFE expected. And therefore, the sort of the bumpiness of a transition is going to be much smoothed by that, I would say, and therefore make it much more politically easy for the DFE to introduce it. So we are probably heading for that, I would suspect, in the next couple of years. Having said that, I mean, locally, will it make much difference at all? I think probably not, because we're already mirroring it as much as we can anyway. And the sort of things that are around the fringes of the funding formula aren't actually in it, such as growth, falling roles, various contingencies. I suspect they will all be left to local discretion anyway, because I can't really see how the DFE could nationalise those sort of things. So I think for us, it will probably be a pretty seamless transition if and when they actually get there.
Okay.
And then just to sort of note that we talked about minimum funding levels increasing above, and it's just worth noting that isn't a sort of a distributionally neutral policy. That directs money towards school with a certain demographic. So basically, if you're a school with relatively high levels of deprivation and or low prior attainment, and that's driving more money to the school per pupil, you're almost certainly in a school that is already above the minimum funding levels. So the schools that are going to be below the minimum funding levels are, with very few exceptions, going to be schools that demographically have lower than average levels of deprivation, low prior attainment. So in a sense, you can see minimum funding levels as being the sort of the anti-pupil premium. So pupil premium for a few years directed money towards schools with more deprivation, and the minimum funding level is now directing money towards schools with less deprivation. Those of you who've been in schools for a while, schools funding, know this is a familiar routine.
Yeah.
You know, you can make arguments both ways. Arguments for what the government's doing now is every school, whatever the demography, needs to have a certain minimum teaching structure, staffing structure, de minimis building costs. So you've got to have a certain amount of money to pay for that. Therefore, you've got to make sure that is adequate. Argument against that is that if you want to close the attainment gap, then you should be directing more money to schools with more deprivation. And at various points in time, depending on the political cycle, one or other of these arguments takes precedence. So the money does tend to sort of be directed in one direction for a while, and then it gradually goes back the other direction. So we're in the sort of the other direction at the moment. Whether they continue to increase minimum funding, I don't know, because obviously the more you sort of increase it, you're picking up more and more schools as you sweep up, you know, more schools are triggering it, and whether that's really a sensible way about going about things, I'm not sure. You could argue, of course, perhaps it's just me being cynical, that if you've got a government setting its own national funding formula, why do you need to have minimum funding levels? They've been telling us for years their national funding formula is by definition jolly fair and much better than local authorities have cobbled together over the years. So why do they need to put some sort of floor under it? Surely all is well now. It's their national funding formula, is it not?
Good point.
But apparently not. Anyway, I'll plough on before the level of cynicism reaches new heights. Right. Yes, they then talk about what this means in real terms for schools. So they believe that a 3% increase in 21-22 will represent a real terms increase for schools. Whether this is the case will depend on A, individual school circumstances, and B, I'm never quite sure how the DFE measure inflation. When I read it, it looks like they take a general measure inflation, like a GDP deflator, that sort of stuff. But of course, for school, that's not really the relevant measure, is it? The relevant measure for schools is, once you take into account of pay awards, etc., what is the real inflation for school then?
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily convinced 3% is going to deliver a real terms increase, but it probably will give at least a semblance of stability for most schools, assuming pupil numbers, etc., stay the same. So, I mean, I don't want to be sort of moaning Minnie all the time. It's not the worst settlement in the world. And they did also give a 3-year settlement because some sort of feel of where we're going. So in that sense, we are in the middle of a reasonably okay funding period for schools, I would argue.
Good.
And then just one or two technical things. So the IDACI data has been updated. So it was, not sure how old, was it very old, Andy, or just a few years? I always forget these things.
About 5 years, I think.
Yeah, well, it's not bad for them, actually, 5 years. But they've updated it to 2019. And I think they've tweaked as well who it applies to. So I seem to recall the last measure, it sort of seemed to pick up about half the population. But they're now saying it picks up 37.5%. Which means basically the funding is directed towards the lowest third and a bit of the school's population, and it's sort of weighted by how deprived each sort of little sort of area is. More deprived, more cash. Growth funding has become quite significant to us in the last couple of years, predominantly because of the growth in the secondary sector. So I think we've had about £1 million, haven't we, Andy, in the last 2 years for growth, something like that.
About 1.1, yeah.
Yeah, so they don't give us that yet because it depends upon the October 20 census data. I mean, my impression is that there's still quite a lot of growth taking place in secondary schools, and therefore we will, I would imagine, get another fair chunk of money. And once again, I would imagine we will be using that to fund schools who've increased their admission number beyond the PAN or have agreed to increase the PAN. I think we've got a hand up there.
Yeah, it's me. It's Tim. It's about the IDACI data.
Yeah.
I think I worked with Andy recently on about getting individual schools IDACI data, and it was a real tough job, but very, very useful for heads to have that data for their individual school. So that you can actually, in the call with Ofsted, for example, when they're talking about your context, you can actually use that as a measure. But I think it was quite hard work getting it. I just wondered if there's any way that schools could have their IDACI data sent to them, because it's when we finally got it, it was actually really useful.
Andy, how did you go about finding it?
I think it was you, Andy, wasn't it? I can't remember. We got it from somewhere. We've got a really nice map and a table and everything.
We pulled some data out of the APT because it gives us percentage in each of the IDACI brackets for each school. So yeah, I mean, we can send that out. I mean, we kind of use it when we send out the contextual data to schools anyway, so it's kind of there. But it's one of those things you see in February, kind of look at the bottom line and go, yeah, okay, pull it to one side. And, if you're not using it all the time, you kind of forget.
Yeah, I think when it's described as part of the funding formula, eyes naturally drawn to the pound signs because that's what is of immediate interest. Whereas, actually it is giving you quite useful information about the the demographic school. Certainly when I if I have course or go and see a school or speak to head teacher, I'll always get up the funding sheet because just looking at that sort of information gives me a reasonably good feel of where the school's coming from. And IDACI arguably is quite interesting there because it does sometimes pick up those schools where the FSM data doesn't look sort of particularly unusual, but then they do have a lot of families who are in the sort of struggling category. So, by free school meals data, it may look very similar to a school up the road, but the actuality of the kids in the school and their background is quite different.
Yeah, I found it very useful to compare Homer Lake with Newdale, for example, and it was quite fine-tuned looking and gave, I think, a really clear picture by way of deprivation, which I think would be useful in a conversation down the road with our friends.
Great.
Yeah, it's good
or
point.
enemies.
Yes. It's really useful data. You're right, Rachel. So is that something, Andy, you can action for us at some point?
Yeah. What I would say is once we get a draft APT in, which is the planning tool that we have to send to the DFE, and it had the new IDACI scores in. And what we actually did was we ran the old formula with the new IDACI scores in. And what it showed across the LA is that the deprivation that we would actually send out to schools went down by about 180 grand. So using the new DFE data, it would imply that there's less deprivation in Telford and Wrekin under the new system than there was under the old.
Mm.
So
That's a bit worrying.
Yeah. Sometimes it depends upon the nature of housing developments as well, doesn't it?
It
If you have significant amounts of new housing and it's mainly sort of, sold privately, just by the nature of the housing, you can then read off sort of the income levels of the families moving in. So you can sort of shift the demographics a bit just by sort of incoming families being a bit more or a bit less deprived than the existing demographic. So, and that sort of thing, you sort of maybe have a feel that might be going on, but then when you see the data, you sort of actually get some sort of confirmation or not. So it can be interesting across the piece as well as for individual schools.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
More high needs.
High needs, yeah. Not put a lot about that because all they've really done is given us a sort of a provisional figure for next year. It's increasing again, not quite as much as the headline figure suggests, because as with mainstream DSG, they've rolled in the teachers paying pension grants. I mean, there's obviously recognition from the DFE that pressures on higher needs continue. More money is going in. From our point of view, what it sort of meant for the last couple of years is we just kept our head above the water. Hasn't really given us an awful lot of leeway, and I don't think we think it's going to next year either. But again, as we said before, compared with the local authorities, we have avoided, apart from 1 year, going to deficit, and the year we did go into deficit, it was a pretty modest amount. It was, I think, less than £100,000. Other authorities, it's been millions.
Yeah.
But it's also, credit to you guys, your colleagues, because, I think me and Simon would agree, we do work pretty constructively, by and large, with schools here, and it helps tremendously when it comes to high needs if you can sort of have conversations with people where there is a sense for collective endeavour and will to try and tackle this, as opposed to everyone sort of fighting their own corner. So that it does help tremendously.
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely agree with that, Tim. And in terms of high needs, our strategy has always been to focus on promoting support in mainstream settings, and I think we need to absolutely do more of that, but also understanding that our special school colleagues have got increasing demands as well. What's worked is the fact that we've actually been looking at the endpoint, so children that are coming out of the system, and there wasn't too much of a focus on that before, so really the numbers just kept increasing, whereas actually now we're talking about ceasing plans. We're also talking about children coming from out of county provisions at a high cost back into Telford as well, and that strategy has really worked and supported the approach. But for me, this year we've obviously just introduced the fair share fund as well for mainstream schools, so that's where at the moment we've got proportionately higher numbers in some of our schools. We need to make sure that they're financially, if you like, compensated, and more initiatives like that have got to come to the fore as we move through the next months and years, really.
Thanks, Simon. Rachel, did you want your hands up? No, you're done. Okay.
And so I'll just summarise what I said before at the end, really, which is it's not a bad settlement. Schools who are sort of topped up by minimum funding levels, there could be some of those schools would see the biggest increase, because if you're a primary school that's just sort of bumped around the 3,750, and then you go up to £4,000, you get another £250 per pupil. So I mean, if you've got 200 pupils, that's I think 50 grand. So it's reasonably sort of significant sums of money. For everyone else, everything else being equal, demographics, probably pretty much enough to cope with sort of the cost pressures you'll have. Probably not a lot more than that, but as I say, at least relative stability, I think, for most schools. So for high needs, well, we'll have to see. We've got more cash. It's kept us afloat the last couple of years, and we'll have to see how this year goes and how next year is looking as to whether it's enough to keep us afloat once more. All right, I think that's me done on that one.
That was quite positive for you.
Yes, I'd like to occasionally break it up with a bit of positivity. You will note, though, I've got the odd dig at the DFE in for old time's sake.
Yeah,
It'd be me if I didn't, would it?
Welcome, Matt.
Yeah, very good.
Any questions for Tim on his paper? Okay, that's great. Well, we're hurtling through this. So next item, early years. Is that Liz?
It is.
Are you with us, Liz? Hello?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Morning, everyone, and thanks, Jill. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come and speak with you today, because I know there's been some questions from Forum in the past about what the early years team provide and what contribution they actually make to children's education. And I'm sure you've all read the paper, but I just want to highlight a few key points from it, if I may. Yep. The paper's written pretty much with reference to the HMI document, Are You Ready?, which is about good practice in early years education and improving school readiness. And it highlights the importance of children's early years experiences in determining their future success in school. And just to emphasise, we've got over 200 providers in Telford and Wrekin of early years education, and they range across our private and voluntary sector, school settings and childminders. And of course, some of our children will access more than one of those providers at any one time. So our providers play a key role in supporting children to be school ready, and of course the quality of provision that they offer is absolutely key to that. And the first thing that our early years team do is that they support our providers with that quality of provision. And they do that through helping them with compliance, which is very important in our early years settings, develop the quality of education. They offer SEND support for SEND children. They offer advice and guidance around safeguarding. And of course, they offer a range of CPD courses. And some of those are traded. But as you'll probably appreciate, a lot of our early years providers have very small margins when it comes to finances. So the charges for those CPD courses are very low indeed, to get as many people along as we possibly can. So at the current time, 98.5% of those 201 providers are rated good or better, which is a very high rate when we compare to national and local and regional averages. And of course, our early years team visit all of those providers to support them to keep that provision as good as it can be. And any provider that's rated less than good, our early years team intervene with those providers just as we would with our schools, and they offer them intensive support and guidance to ensure that they get to good for their next inspection. The second thing I wanted to highlight is that we have got 8 early years hubs across the region, and that's an opportunity for our early years providers to work together with our schools to talk about school readiness and to make sure that we have some consistency in practice across those local areas. So we've now got 8 of those early years hubs. And there's 2 key functions really of those hubs. One is to help providers and schools to work together to make sure that there's a blended childcare offer, so that a child might do some of its funded hours in one setting and then access an alternative provider to complete that offer, and also to develop good practice. So in our best hubs, we're actually looking at data. We're looking at weaker areas identified in the data and working together to share good practice and to improve those outcomes. Third thing I wanted to pull out was that our early years team get involved in national programmes and initiatives and bid for money. And the most recent successful bid has been for the Early Years Professional Development Programme. And this is designed to support pre-reception and early years practitioners to improve practice with working with children to develop their language, literacy and maths, and for the most disadvantaged children in particular. And again, there's that emphasis on improving school readiness. Another function of that work is to develop a network of effective local partnerships And so that programme is being delivered through our hubs. So that includes our reception teachers, childminders, all working together to look at how they can improve those outcomes for children. The fourth function that they provide is they look at sufficiency. And this is not a widely understood fact, I don't think, that the local authority's got a statutory duty to provide sufficient early years and childcare places for all our disadvantaged 2-year-olds and for our 3- and 4-year-olds. And every year, the early years team conduct an annual childcare sufficiency assessment. So they look at where provision is needed, where we haven't got enough, and they encourage providers to offer more so that we meet parental needs. And they are, in order to help to make that childcare offer sustainable, they offer business planning support to our private businesses. So as well as managing the funding distribution to providers for the funded 2-, and 3-, and 4-year-old provision, they also coordinate the funding for early years pupil premium grants. And that includes supporting parents with registration and publicising the offer through a range of partners so that as many parents as possible get access to those entitlements. And you can see in the tables that I've included in the paper that actually, in terms of the percentage of children that access our 2-year-old funded offer and 3- and 4-year-old funded offer, we do well compared to regional and national percentages. The fifth thing they support with is making sure that safeguarding is effective in all of our provisions. We all know that safeguarding is a priority, and the early years team support our providers in the same way that our team supports schools. So we share model policies, we raise awareness of any updates, we work with the providers to complete a safeguarding audit and offer support to develop practice. And currently, 98.5% of early years providers actually meet safeguarding requirements on inspection, so you can see the impact of the work of our team there. And then just finally, I want to just focus a bit on outcomes for children. So the table shows that the proportion of children reaching a good level of development across the borough is much closer to national now than ever, and that more disadvantaged children in the borough reach the standard than do nationally and regionally. And I'm sure that all of us here recognise that a child's education journey continues from birth through primary and secondary school and on through further education, and that the contribution of all our providers is equally important to that success. And there's so much research out there that supports the fact that the investment in early years education to ensure that this is of high quality has a lasting impact on a child's future success. And just to finish, I've included a quote there from a primary head teacher. Again, that's lifted from that Are You Ready HMI report, about the expectations that we have of our 4-year-olds when they enter primary school. And if you just read through that final quote, I think you'll see that we actually expect quite a lot from our 4-year-olds when they come into school. And then just to finish, really, to say that, you know, a child's learning journey does begin well before they enter primary school. And I know that we're fortunate in Telford and Wrekin that our early years providers, supported by our team, are of really high calibre. And I think we'd all agree that we'd want that to continue.
Thanks
so,
very much.
Jill, happy to take questions if anybody has any.
Great, thank you, Liz. And any questions from forum members? Christabel? No. Anybody else got their hand up? Claire? I knew you were there somewhere. Hi, Claire.
Yes, I just wanted to make a couple of points, and absolutely, definitely an early years advocate and champion of ensuring that provision in all settings, whether it's schools or PBIs or childminders, are preparing children to be ready for school. But I have queried this before, Liz, on Schools Forum, in terms of how much we use the service from a school's point of view. Obviously looking at, you know, the number of settings, the number of childminders, the number of PBIs in comparison to the number of schools with nurseries. I don't doubt that that service is really needed for the PBI and childminder sector, but I can only speak from our point of view, from our school, in terms of how much we use the service, which is really quite minor. The hubs, we are a hub school, and my EYFS lead really does all the work around organising the hub and sorting out agendas, sharing paperwork. We host the people here, so very much we lead on the hub. Safeguarding returns, well, we don't do separate ones. They're all done the same for the whole school, so we're not using that safeguarding early years team at all. So I just struggle personally to see how the teams support the school sector, which is why I've raised it before about whether it could become more of a traded service for schools. So, I'm lucky that I've got, great expertise in my school, but there might be a time when I don't, and I might need somebody training up. But I would want that to, be as and when I needed it through more of a traded service option for schools.
I think that's a fair point, actually, Claire. And I think we do offer a traded service for schools. Lisa, do you want to come in?
Yeah, yes, we do. If schools want that, you can buy in and have more support from the team. But I'd also just like to say that I'm personally working this month. I've worked with 7 schools to support practice in schools, looking at developing 2-year-old provision and also looking at developing out of school places, and that's just just in 1 month really. So that's ongoing. So schools do use us.
So maybe we need to publicise that more.
Yes. Yeah. No. So I make a note of how many I talk to, and I've got meetings with this month, and it's quite it's more than I think actually. And there are other members of my team engaging with them as well.
Thanks, Lisa. Rachel, were you going to come in there?
Yes, please. I think what you've just said, Liz, publicise it more. I think that's absolutely key.
Yeah.
I've just emailed my early years team and said, what hub are we actually in and what are we doing? And I feel like I'm not up to speed enough, and that might just be me, distracted with other things. I don't know, but I think we do need more communication out there about what is available, what the hubs are, where are the hubs, how often do they meet, who's in those hubs, what's the benefit of going to those hubs, all of that type of information I think would be worth perhaps resending if it's already been sent. But I think it needs to go to head teachers. Maybe it's gone to early years leads, I don't know, but I think it needs to go to head teachers as well if possible.
Okay, so I think then, Lisa, maybe we need to talk about getting something on the education notice board next Thursday.
We can pop when the next hub dates are, and we've got a nice leaflet to share with you. But I'm happy if anybody wants to know about where's their local hub, please contact me.
Okay.
Lisa, can I just ask, does anybody from the early years team attend the hub meetings?
Yes, each hub is supported by one member of my team.
Okay.
So you'd have an awareness of then how well they were operating and what attendance was like at hub meetings.
Yeah, we've got some that sort of Grange Park. That one is that's been operating for about 6 years now, and that's where I'd like all of our hubs to be. But it takes a long time.
Some are probably more successful than others.
That's true.
Yeah. And we have to have more input with some of them, and it's sort of I think it's breaking down professional boundaries. It's really important that we get it right for our very youngest children, so that when they come into school, you don't have to do lots of catch up with them. It's just really, really important. Children don't just arrive at 5. It's all that hard work when they're 0 to 5 that's important, and sometimes that's not always recognised. And I think that's a barrier we need to break down too.
And I think, as you say, Lisa, I think it's just, and Liz, it's about raising awareness, isn't it? Because there's new heads who come in and out, into Telford who, need to understand the infrastructure and what's on offer. And I know there's been a lot of change in primary heads over the summer. So I think, it's probably timely to get some information out. Mr. Bell, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, our hub, I'm a bit like Claire really, our hub's run quite effectively by my early years coordinator. what we have found is that actually we get far more attendance doing it on Teams.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because people aren't having to travel. So I think we're moving more to a Teams base because that suits people much more. So, but I think the hubs are more effective in certain places than they are in others, and it depends who's driving it, really.
It's a bit like the clusters, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, similar.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, everybody. So, Lisa, you're sort of charged with an action there to maybe update some information. Tim, you're going to do the interesting subject of new financial transparency rules.
I am, but before that, I've got a piece of information for the early years bit as well.
Oh, sorry.
Because this sort of comes up when we ask the forum each year for any money retained for central support for early years.
Yeah.
So there is benchmarking data about that and how we compare to other authorities, which I thought it was worth knowing. When we come to the actual vote later in this year, we'll share this again. But just for your information, the national average in England is £14 per pupil, and we come out at £6 per pupil. So we are, in compared to the national, relatively modest in the amount that we actually ask schools for to fund central services, less than half national average.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks, Tim. Any other? Right, Simon Wellman's had to lose us because he's gone to talk about COVID.
It's not really that. It's that he looked at the next item and he thought, even he's got quite used to me droning on about stuff, but even by my normal standards, new financial transparency rules for local authorities and maintained schools, including the School Information (England) Amendment Regulation 2020, does not sound like the most fascinating thing that he's ever going to listen to.
No, and we've had this for a while.
But all you've got to stay.
So this is the thing about 3 strikes and you're out, isn't it? Because we've got that in our financial returns, and then they're going to publish a list of all those people who failed to get their returns in on time and humiliate them. Yeah,
that's right. If anyone actually looks at these piece of information, which
who does? God.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, you're quite right, Jill. That this arises because the DfE had been sort of been aware a number of trusts feel more accountable for their financial position in the academy sector than they did when they were maintained school. And that fed into the DfE's view that current financial transparency arrangements for academies are generally stronger than those in place in maintained schools. So they had a consultation about a year ago, which I have to say sort of passed me by. I had a vague awareness of it, but I don't seem to have contributed to any sort of Telford response. And I don't know whether I apologies forgot about it, but it's one of those things that comes up again, and it comes as sort of a surprise because you've sort of forgotten about it. But anyway, they've now sort of said they're going to do a number of things following the consultation, which has implications for local authorities and maintained schools, but not for academies. So obviously this is one of those items we take to the forum that isn't directly relevant to all of you. But for local authorities, so us, as Jill's just mentioned, they've got a naming and shaming thing that if we miss 3 deadlines in any single financial year for various returns, then they will publish our names. Oh no! On some sort of site. Which no one will look at. There you go. So that's the first one. There will be 4 additions to the existing DSG annual assurance statement signed by the local authority chief finance officer, something of which I'm sure you're all very much aware. So the following will have to be reported to the DfE. Number of schools with suspended budgets and notices of financial concern. I mean, for us that will be normally 0. I mean, we occasionally would have a school which, for various individual reasons, might have a notice of financial concern, but it's pretty rare. Amount that LAs are recorded from investigating fraud, again, would normally be very, very low, I would say. Number of recovery plans in each LA, yeah, we'd probably normally have a handful of those maybe. Number of related party transactions in maintained schools and the value of each transaction. So you've probably come across related party transactions in the context of every so often you get a news story about schools. Academy seems to be the ones that mainly been reported where there's been some person linked to the academy and then that person's company or some relative's company or whatever has had work passed them by the academy or school. So that's a related party transaction. So those 4 additions will be required for the September 2021 return. What it does do, of course, it gives the DfE again a bit more information. So, should they want to intervene, they've got a bit more info to go on. Right, next one is for the LA again. High-level action plans will be required from LAs in which the number or proportion of school revenue deficits over 5% is above a certain level. So what is that certain level, you may ask? Well, the DfE have left it to themselves to decide what that might be, so who knows? But we'll have to see. And LAs could be requested to submit high-level action plans at any time during the year, as and when requested by the department. So get them.
Yeah.
So that's what we've got to do.
So it's really a local authority issue, isn't it, this one?
Well, that section is, then we come into maintain schools. So all those ones are, I mean, in terms of the extra work it will involve us doing, it's pretty minimal, I would have thought. I mean, most of these, the answer will be 0 or very, very low level. But as I say, it does give the DfE a bit more information, which they can then use to intervene if they want to intervene. Then you come to maintain schools. So what to maintain schools got to do? Well, we've got to submit to the Section 151 officer, that's Ken Clark in Telford, 3-year budget forecasts starting in 21-22. Well, schools all do that because you have to for the SFVS. The difference is that they want it by the 30th of June. Now, we usually do 3-year budgets. There's a cat about to join the meeting. Check her out. We normally do 3-year budgets for schools, but we normally do a bit later than that because we sort of do closure accounts. We'll do the sort of first monitoring for schools, and then we'll do 3-year budgets. And it sort of hits around July time, sort of school holiday-ish coming into. So it's a bit of a nuisance in the sense it then brings that back into what for us is a busier time. We haven't quite thought this through, but what we could do is do something to enable schools to hit the 30th June deadline and then do a more considered 3-year budget when we've got a bit more time to do it. We'll have to see how it goes. So it's a sort of a timing change as opposed to an additional piece of work.
Can I just come in there, Tim?
Yeah.
Because obviously we have to do this for our returns we have to do a thing called a BFRO return and 3-year forecast. And one of the issues with it is you never know necessarily the pay awards at that time.
Oh no, I mean, I've never got one right in all my time do school budgets.
And it's just, I think, something for people to say, it's a very ballpark figure.
Correct.
Because you do not know some really critical information, and I don't understand why we have to submit it at a time of year when, it's just not true,
No, and certainly when we do them, they often look terrible.
Yeah.
Because we in schools are reluctant to put income in that we aren't sure about.
Yeah.
But equally, conservatism says if you think you might incur costs, you'll probably put them in. So you multiply that that attitude by 3 years, and you inevitably end up with something looking pretty dire. Whereas the actuality is, usually much better. And we've tried to demonstrate this to schools. Every time we do them, we send something with the blurb around it saying, if you look at what the average school said it was going to do each year in terms of how much of its balance it was going to spend, and what actually happened for 80% of schools, it's better than they would have predicted. To sort of say, well, if you multiply about 3 guys, it's going to look bad, isn't it? So yes, the use they have is, yes, if you've got falling numbers or something else significant, it does highlight the fact that you have to do something about it. But beyond that, is it worth a huge amount of anyone's time? Probably not, to be honest.
I mean, we've certainly learned, we put in real estimations and, we don't actually take a huge amount of notice of it. It's just an exercise we have to go through.
Correct. There is an element of box ticking about this, I think.
Yeah.
But, that's the nature of the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
The next one is a list of related party transactions to a new question in the school's financial value standard. So that picks up on the previous point about related party transactions. A recovery plan for the maintaining authority when the deficit rises above 5%. Well, we'd require schools to do that anyway. So, that's not really any different. It just puts a specific figure around it. So that's what they have to return to us, maintain schools. We'll say they, you in some cases. And also there's 2 other requirements in terms of publications. So on the website for maintain schools, each year, maintain schools will be required to publish a number of individuals earning over £100,000, and that's gross, so it includes pensions, etc., in £10,000 bandings, and that's going to apply in a few months' time from 1st of January 2021. And a link from the school's website to the benchmarking website, where you can pick up CFR data. So if anyone, parents, public, want to, they can move quickly from the school website to a financial benchmarking website.
Yeah.
So, the already very low traffic on the financial benchmarking website might move up a smidge. So we'll have to incorporate those requirements in the local scheme for financing schools. I've just said that in terms of what we currently do, the change that it'll make is pretty modest in scale. I don't see this being an enormous drain on anyone's time and resources. But I have said from our perspective, the phrase "a solution in search of a problem" comes to mind, because I don't perceive that this is going to address any problems that have arisen locally. We do this sort of thing anyway. The other stuff around it is sort of fairly ho-hum.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite interesting though that they're bringing local authorities and maintained schools into very similar financial regulations for academies. Quite an interesting move.
Yeah, and no surprise in the sense that if you take a step back, it is a strange situation nationally to have a dual track school system.
Yeah.
There can't be many countries in the world who think this is a wise way to go about things. But this is where we've ended up. A few years ago, we had a sort of, when Michael Gove was Secretary of State, the direction of travel was towards sort of full-scale academisation, I think. There was a sort of an aborted target for that, I think, that got pulled. And then since then, we've sort of in this sort of no man's land of continuing encouragement to schools to convert, but not the same compulsion that there used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and having different financial years, I mean, from a school point of view, it clearly makes more sense to have an academic year, financial year, as academies do. But maintained schools, because they're still tied to the rest of the public sector, have a different financial year. We get used to it, but it's a very strange way of running things, really.
It is. But even though we still see some of our funding coming in on, the Treasury's financial year, not on the Academy financial year, so there is inconsistencies.
That's right. Well, all the public sector runs on a sort of, a tax year or quasi-tax year, April to March. So inevitably, it's difficult to avoid that if you're an academy, because that's the way the rest of the public sector runs. So.
Anybody got any questions for Tim on this incredibly exciting subject?
Thanks, Joe, for that. Yeah, I like to think so. I'm eager to give you a good 10 minutes sort of further on any of these.
No, don't worry. We're fine. Looking at the lack of hands that have gone up, looks like you've got away with it.
Disappointing, that is. Disappointing. I'm sure as well there was more red circles at the bottom of the screen when I started to talk, and I kept an eye on it. I think every 5 minutes I lost someone.
Yeah, people keep saying they've left the meeting when I look at this.
It's a bit like watching our local cabinet online. Oh, shouldn't have said that, should I?
Great, thanks, Tim. Right, we've hurtled through that. So, any other business anybody'd like to raise? If you'd like to pop your hand up or something. Fantastic. That means we'll have done Schools Forum in an hour and 3 minutes or something.
Well, that's the bar you set now, Jill. So any meeting that takes more than an hour now, we'll be wondering about the chairpersonship of it.
I can't stay on Teams for too long. My brain just can't handle it.
Yeah, I know how you feel. Yeah.
So if there's no any other business, then I think the date of the next meeting is the 19th of November at 9:30.
So can I just jump in there, Jill? I think we have got a bit of ARB. Tim, did you want to talk about the CV19 grant?
Yeah, I could potentially touch on that a bit. Yeah. So we've had a number of schools sort of applied for grant. I can't remember the numbers now, but I think it's probably a majority of the sort of schools who could have applied. And for at least some of that, we've had replies back with additional monies being distributed. What we haven't had back, though, is where schools had put items in the other column. So this was something that didn't fit into the DFE's fairly restrictive categories of what you could claim for. I gather the DFE is still considering those. And for some schools, they had put quite a considerable amount in the other column. So for those schools, we still await developments. The government's also said there'll be a second sort of bite at the cherry on this one. So they will have another sort of window to apply. Now, it's not entirely clear whether that second window will sort of gather up extra costs that have been incurred this term and next term, because I know schools are still having to do additional cleaning and such like, which they wouldn't normally do, therefore incurring more costs. Now, whether the DFE see that as something that they would, again, allow schools to claim for, I don't know. Obviously, all of this is against the background of no one being quite sure how CV19 is going to progress, and to what extent relative normality is coming along anytime soon. So there's a bit of a watch this space on this one. But it shows it was worth schools applying, because I can't remember the total sum we got, Andy, but it was a 6-figure sum, wasn't it? Back?
We've got 119 grand in, but you're quite correct in so much that they had 3 brackets where you could put costs in that they thought were fair, they thought were fair, and they also left a bracket for exceptional. Anyone that's put anything in exceptional are waiting, and any school that's gone past the threshold that they could actually claim, they're having to wait. I suspect they'll go through all of those in detail before they actually give us a heads up on what's happening in the autumn term.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we certainly, when we did ours, we didn't put anything in the other column because, it was, you just didn't know whether you were going to get, it was really up in the air. Rachel?
I just wanted to know, is there any plans? Tim, you normally do these budget meetings for school business managers and heads.
Yeah.
What's the situation with those? Just sharing information.
Yeah, I mean, we normally do them sort of in January once the budgets go out, and I would certainly want to do something. I mean, if we're still in the same situation, it could end up being on Teams. If so, I think I might maybe do more meetings with fewer people, because I'm not sure having sort of 50, 60 people in one of these meetings is really ideal. But I will do it in some shape or form. It's just that the shape or form will have to depend on where we are.
Okay, thank you.
I do periodically also go along to they have business manager groups, and they invite me along every sort of year or 6 months or so. And once again, at the moment, I'm assuming that would be a Teams event, but I'm more than happy to attend those too.
Another option would be to do them with clusters, wouldn't it, Tim? Because I think we've spoken about that before.
Yeah, and it might be an opportunity, because it is easy for everyone, I think, to sort of get together now, because you just sort of log on, don't you? So maybe there's an argument to take advantage of that and do the meetings in a size of group where it can be a bit more conversational. I personally find them always more interesting for everyone concerned if you can have a bit of a conversation about things, as opposed to me sort of just doing a sort of presentation style. I think, even I find it dull, to be honest, at times.
Well, after all these years?
Probably because I've done it all these years, Jill. Yeah.
I think that's a good suggestion, Andy, that because the clusters are meeting virtually, so it would be a good idea to jump on those meetings in January, perhaps.
Yeah, just give me half an hour or something, and
Yeah. Okay. Any other business? Great. So at the moment we're due to meet in November. I suspect, Tim, we'll still have to be on Teams. I can't see.
I think it's looking that way, Jill. Yeah.
Anything changing at the moment that's going to allow us to meet? If we got rule of 6 and mixing of households and all the other stuff we're dealing with.
Yeah, I agree.
I think at the moment it's going to be Teams unless something radically changes, and then we'll review it, obviously, meeting by meeting as we see what's happening.
Okay.
All right. So I think that's it, unless I'm told otherwise.
No, I think we're done.
Okay. Can I just thank everybody for being on the call today, and have a lovely COVID-free day. And, okay. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Jill.
Thanks, Jill.
See you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.